Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm thrilled. My name is Nick. I'm very excited to be joined by Johnette, Deborah, Travis, and Kat. We're going to talk about the law, which I know is everyone's favorite discussion, especially in crypto. Really quickly, I want the panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it. So Johnette, over to you.
Good morning. I'm Johnette Jerome. I'm a Senior Assistant Attorney General, the California Department of Justice, and I supervise the e-crime team.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. My name is Deborah McCrimmon. I'm Deputy General Counsel at Ripple, which is a crypto solutions company. Among other things, I lead our litigation team and was instrumental in our defense of our recent litigation with the SEC.
Hey everyone, glad to be here. I'm Travis Moore. I'm the founder and executive director of Tech Congress. Show of hands, who remembers when Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress in 2018 and got asked about his business model? Yeah, we solved for that, placing computer scientists, engineers, and other technologists in Congress to build a pipeline for this expertise into the public sector.
Hi, I'm Kat Walsh. I'm the General Counsel at Creative Commons, which is the nonprofit behind the Creative Commons licenses. My background is mostly in free and open source software and content licensing and internet law and policy.
Awesome. So, great panel. I think one area I would like to start is, I think there's been a consensus, I would say, within the crypto industry that a lot of the existing laws and regulations, at least at the federal level and certainly at some of the state levels, are not really adequate to meet the totality of what crypto is doing. So Deborah, I want to just start with you. Where do you see kind of these, big gaps? What are the specific issues that maybe aren't quite getting captured yet?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for 6 years now, as I mentioned, and for those of you lucky enough not to be familiar with it, Ripple was sued by the SEC in late December 2020, and the government was alleging that our distributions of the digital asset XRP were securities, and we failed to register those transactions with the SEC. And so, this was not a fraud case, this was not a market manipulation case, this was strictly a registration case. Were our transactions securities that needed to be registered with the SEC? And so, I feel like I have been sort of at the forefront of watching the lack of regulation in this space and what that has done to companies who are really trying to act lawfully. Sure, there are some bad actors in the industry, but most people in this industry, at least the people that I've had the privilege of meeting, are people who really want to act in compliance with the law. And what that is right now is wholly unclear in the digital asset space. So, are digital assets commodities? Are they securities? Are they currency? Are they property if you're the IRS? Are they more than one? Are they all of them? These are questions that the industry still doesn't have clear answers to. And so what we've seen over the last many years is the SEC really step in and try and claim that space and say, and their position has evolved over time, but basically where they are now is nearly every single digital asset is a security. And therefore, the SEC has jurisdiction over all of that. And what has been interesting is that they're using laws from the 1930s to assert that jurisdiction. But what we're seeing over the last couple of years is bills being proposed in Congress that are trying to regulate the space that don't actually give that authority to the SEC. And so I think what we're seeing is still real lack of clarity around the regulation in this space. Lawyers like myself, even before we were sued by the SEC, I think what we do is we spend a lot of time poring over settlements that the SEC has reached, the few orders that have come out in this space, trying to figure out, okay, how can I advise my client on how to act lawfully? And that's a really terrible place to be in. It's terrible for the industry and it's not sustainable. We were quite successful in our litigation with the SEC. Most notably, I would call out is that the judge in our case came out and said, XRP itself is not a security. And that's super important, not just for XRP, but the SEC and their ability to regulate is based on this idea of an investment contract. And what that is, the SEC's position has really changed over time. Sometimes it's the digital asset itself, which I vociferously disagree with, and our court fortunately agreed with us that the asset itself is not the security. But there's a lot of uncertainty around that still. And having gone and listened to a couple of the hearings that the SEC has been arguing against some exchanges in this space, even their position in cases today changes on whether or not the asset itself is a security. So I think there's a lot of holes and a lot of reason why we need some clarity in this space.
Right. And then, Donna, from your perspective as someone who operates in the state level, do you feel there are also similar areas where maybe you need more authorities or clarity or some kind of extension to do your job properly?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, being the jackbooted thug in the room, I'm used to this. I'm looking at this from a law enforcement perspective. And how do we use good policing practices? How do we use good community policing to police the internet? And that's been a challenge that I've been facing for a couple of decades now. I really like, Michelle, what you said about blockchain versus currency. I mean, there's a protocol here that has the potential to do so much good. And that's where I would like to see more development. I'm sorry I didn't get to see all of the European discussion because I know I was very excited in December when it came out that there was going to be this comprehensive legislation regarding AI. And I thought, wonderful, this is great. But I realized that was developed in 2021 before ChatGPT came out. So that's really not going to be quite as comprehensive as we're hoping for. I can tell you that from my daily work, one of the things we deal with is pig butchering. Does everyone know what pig butchering is? Only a few. Pig butchering is, it used to be called a rug pull scam, where a confidence scam involves a person contacting you, becoming friendly with you, showing you their website where their cryptocurrency is making lots and lots of money. And eventually they show you, hey, you can do it yourself, here's how. And they'll get you to do $5, $10, and $10. Pretty soon, they fatten you up so that they can take your entire life savings and everything they've convinced you to invest and all of that. It's a horrible situation. And it's very difficult to prosecute because we only hear a percentage of the victims. They're embarrassed. They don't want to report. They need to report to their local law enforcement, and local law enforcement doesn't have the tools or the resources to deal with these kind of crimes. They need to report it to IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is operated by the FBI, but they don't monitor every single thing, and they certainly won't take cases under $1 million worth of loss. So that leaves a real gap for victims in California, and that's where we've tried to fill that gap. We've tried to use commercial software to trace cryptocurrency transactions, but even then, we can only interdict once it gets hot to an exchange that we can reach. When I say we can reach, that I mean is cooperative with law enforcement, where we can send a preservation letter, or we can send a seizure order, or we can send a search warrant. So only those exchange companies that operate within a regulatory system where they want to comply and cooperate will get us a place where we can interdict, stop that, and get the money back to the victim. And we've done it, but as you can imagine, it's really a game of whack-a-mole. And I would certainly like to see not only the infrastructure contemplate regulations, rules, how to accommodate, but I'd like to see some creativity and some ability, particularly from the law enforcement perspective, to not always have to be so reactive to crime. I mean, that's what happens when a crime happens. Then police show up, they measure the response time. That's a metric for good policing. I mean, that's just not applicable on the internet. We need to have some kind of interactivity and some kind of ability to interact.
I don't work for HBO, but John Oliver and Last Week Tonight just had an episode on pig butchering. And
it was intense. Can I just say that was a really good piece? It was last Friday night, and it shows you the really important both sides of that terrible equation. You've got the people being victimized in countries like US, and then you've got the people who are doing the victimizing are enslaved themselves. They're being human trafficked and kept under conditions that are horrifying and forced to conduct this fraud. It's a horrible situation, largely in countries like Myanmar, like Cambodia, like places that are not going to be cooperative with international jurisdiction.
Yeah, definitely recommend watching it if you want to learn more. But kind of building on this, Travis, without getting into specifics of any legislation or bills that may or may not be introduced, are lawmakers even kind of, what kind of conversations are they having? What will it take to, maybe have these conversations where we're talking about, not just the pig butchering scams and not just the securities laws, but just having Congress at least have a conversation that is beyond, just mere talking points.
Yeah. To answer that, I want to tell a little bit of a story, and I want to broaden this beyond Congress because I think this is, these are issues. Tech is reshaping society in fundamental ways. These are issues at every level of government. I was at the National Conference of State Legislatures Summit last summer. Show of hands, who's heard of NCSL? Has anybody heard of NCSL? Oh, good number of hands. Okay, great. This is a conference a quarter of the state legislators in the country go to, a fifth of the state legislative staff go to. I mean, it is, everybody convenes there. There was one session on emerging technology. It was a panel, one session. It was a panel, it was led by a state senator who probably had some opinions, but he was moderating it. And then it was a representative from just a sort of DC consulting firm and then a lobbyist from Amazon. Hour-long session, room probably about 1.5 times the size of this room, so about 50% deeper. Standing room only. I mean, you've got state legislators on top of one another in the corner. After the session is over, the line from these elected state legislators to talk to the panelists was all the way to the AV folks here. Members of Congress and state legislators have woken up. This is the good news. This is not true when I started Tech Congress 9 years ago. Members get that they don't understand technology. They will privately tell you this. And they are looking for help. But if we're not on those panels, if we're not showing up to NCSL, they're gonna get information from the status quo. And the status quo, like by and large, no disrespect to lawyers are very risk averse. So this is my plug for, we need more technologists in the room to inform these policymakers. This is obviously what we do. And we see that when we can put people in the right places, we have, so Tara Birchmore, who's working for Cynthia Lummis, that's managing the Lummis-Gillibrand bill. We had Alice Howe, who went to go work for Roger Wicker on the Senate Commerce Committee, a member that prior to that had taken very little interest in blockchain. And she convinced him, we need some R&D here. And so she managed to get the National Distributed Ledger Technology Act into the Defense Authorization Bill in 2022. This requires an R&D strategy from the National Science Foundation, grants to universities to study how we can use DLT for privacy-enhancing technologies, for increased competition. So in sum, members of Congress, they're open to this, but we need to show up for them. Because right now, also, you've got about 15 members, I'd say, in the House and the Senate that are engaged on these issues, and they're champions. But the rest is really white space. And that's in part because they haven't had to take votes on these issues yet. Once they take votes, they will be on the record. And so how they vote on those first couple votes is extraordinarily consequential.
Did you want to?
No, I just said that quite literally, it's all white spaces. I mean,
Yep.
the guy earlier said it's the 3 white lawyers in the basement who are making the policy. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
It needs to be more inclusive.
Kat, looking from your perspective, you're obviously Creative Commons is doing a lot, but I think they benefit from not being quite so deep into the nitty-gritty of blockchain as some of the rest of us are. So just kind of curious, from your perspective, what kind of engagement are you seeing? What kind of conversations are you even seeing? Is this at the level of interest yet where those conversations can proceed to, maybe to lawmakers having more substantive discussion and conversations?
Yeah, I think there's really a lot of parallels between the development of Creative Commons licensing and the free and open source software space and the blockchain space. And open source has a couple decades head start, but they both came from okay, here's a system that is not working for us. This is not working for the way that we want to work. we're going to build something on top of it so that we don't have to reform the whole system. We just have to like build a thing on top of it that will work with like the ways that we think about sharing, the way that we think about copyright. The way that I see a lot of the blockchain innovation happening is also like we think about property or asset ownership or like tracking of assets in a way that is different than the existing system supports. Like we want to build something on top of that. And what I've seen in the copyright and licensing space is that like the law was not prepared for that. A lot of the discussions that have happened over the past several decades about like remedies, about infringement, have all assumed that there are several places in Hollywood that put out big content and those are the only things that matter. Like everything should be directed to making sure that those people are happy. Similarly, a lot of the things that we see around like finances, like, you know, it's not thinking that there are people building decentralized systems that may have incentives that are not in line with the way that like everything has worked for the past several centuries. Like people are building things on top of it that make different assumptions about like ownership, about who is responsible. And the law's slowly coming around to that. And the first things that we see are like, oh, these are all hackers, these are all criminals, like we don't need to consider what they need, we really only need to consider the big industries. And I think that's slowly changing as we see these blockchain industries becoming like more established. It becomes clearer that these are legitimate businesses that people are really building a living and a life off of. So we see a lot of overlap between the like Creative Commons community and the blockchain community, particularly as people are needing to find new ways to make a living. They're like, okay, the way that people think about like ownership, about like a rewarding effort are not working for us. We're going to try these technologies and see if we can get, you know, can we make smart contracts? Can we like sell some of our rights on the blockchain and make that work for us? So we're seeing a lot of people who have like adopted the new system in one thing, like adopt the new thing in the other thing, thinking like, okay, can these innovations work for me in the way that I've been working? I'm already not working within the established assumptions. And I think as it becomes more and more established and people are more and more used to like, okay, there's a lot of people using this new system, it must work for them. Even I see that like along with lawyers who are in fact the most risk averse and lawmakers. Like just as it becomes more accepted and a thing that normal people do, I think that that law will accept it a little bit more.
So, and open up to the panel, but you know, where's that line? Are we, you know, how do we ensure that we're not doomed to looking at legislation that addresses stuff that's happened? How do, you know, is there a way to ensure that it is also more forward-looking, that it is, you know, obviously it's hard to predict the future, and, you know, maybe when we're talking about like court cases, it's all facts and circumstances based, so to borrow that phrase. But is there a way of looking forward and saying, okay, well, here's a way of building a structure or a framework for either, you know, within crypto companies and the technology itself to help address some of these issues, or in legislation? And Deborah, I want to start with you, and then.
Yeah. I mean, my reaction is, yeah, there are ways to do it. All we need to do is, I mean, look outside the US. There are other jurisdictions around the world that have figured out crypto policy. And it's not to say that we need to do exactly what the UK is doing or Dubai is doing or Singapore is doing, but I think what we can learn is that there is a way to do this. Crypto and blockchain is not going away. And so we need to figure it out. Ripple has offices outside the US and you know, among other places, London and Singapore. And I was talking to one of my colleagues on the policy team in London maybe 6 months ago. And he was saying, he's like, the thing is, you know, the US, you know, in many respects in the financial markets has been a leader. But now, you know, he's traveling and meeting with governments all over the world, policymakers all over the world. He's like, nobody cares about what the US is doing because it's just such a mess. Whereas it's given opportunities for other jurisdictions to step into that leadership role. And so from our perspective, we feel like the US is really missing an opportunity that other jurisdictions like Dubai, like UK, Singapore, and others are stepping into quite readily.
Done like, so I know, you know, as a state regulator, you have a somewhat limited jurisdiction, but what kind of work have you been doing with other state regulators, and does that even come close to kind of making up for a lack of federal involvement, or does it require them to also be involved in a way that maybe they aren't right now?
Well, I think there is some space within the federal government to allow some better use and some more flexibility within both the internet and blockchain. I think I mentioned to you that as a state prosecutor, I can't send a search warrant to another state unless under certain circumstances. I certainly can't send a search warrant to London or somewhere else to get the evidence that I need to pursue the case. So that's something that could be worked on, I suppose. But from my perspective, I'd like to see things like blockchain being used more locally. We talked about this idea of organized retail crime is really popular among the legislature right now to discuss. There's a lot of money being given to a lot of local agencies to fight this crime. Well, what if we were to use blockchain to distribute things like this? There are ways this can be done. There are creative solutions that can be made. But I think that making laws is not necessarily the right way to go.
Travis?
Yeah, I think the more that we can get government comfortable with the technology, the less reactive it can be. And so I will come back to, I think places where we can engage are things like R&D, grant programs, applications within government. Those can be low-hanging fruit when we're thinking about how to further the conversation. There is going to be some sort of chips too, likely in the next Congress or two. Like, there's no reason that we shouldn't have. And AI, AI is everywhere. AI is what it is. It's an opportunity, right? And so none of these conversations, all of these conversations, we should be thinking about the uses and how we can get government more comfortable with employing and deploying both research and uses of blockchain. So that's how I would think about like sort of early engagement.
And Kat, I know I think you'll be our last speaker. So, from your perspective, what are the areas for engagement? Where are the opportunities now?
I think a lot of like personal stories and personal engagement is the best way that I've found to connect with people. Like, you can talk to people in the abstract forever and they'll remember what they heard in the news, but if you make people care about like, okay, this technology that you've heard about, this person is using it to transfer money to their family, or like this artist you love is using it to like fund their album and they couldn't before, and like making like, okay, like why should I care? Because if there's only so much people can care about things that they don't have a personal connection to. But once you've made it real for them, like this is part of your life, this is part of the life of people then it becomes more real and they're more willing to advocate for it.
Awesome. I believe that's time. But thank you all so much for taking the stage, and thank you all for joining us and listening. And thank you to Senator for hosting this.